afternoon, everybody. We are Remapping the Caribbean, a Story Plus group that's looking at Haitian and Cuban migration to the United States. We were paired with Ayana Ligro, and she's a graduate student, and Lauren Dubois, a professor. My name is Asha Henderson, and I'm a rising sophomore.
My name is Ali Perez, and I'm a rising junior.
And I'm San Halim, I'm a rising sophomore. Just this last week, news that Trump deported over 2,000 children from families at the border dominated headlines. For the past 3 years, Syrian refugees have been flooding to Europe with governments ill-equipped to help them. And currently, a brutal civil war in Cameroon has thousands of civilians displaced. So from these kind of news, we can see that the plight of refugees is a real and pressing problem. But this is a problem that has existed throughout history. And more specifically, we're looking at the stories of Cuban and Haitian refugees. We've been doing this through archives. So in our time at Story Plus, we've been looking at the archives of the National Coalition for Haitian Rights. And this is an organization that from 1982 to 2006, they've been fighting for Haitian rights. And so we got these archives from a man named Joseph McCullough, who was executive director for the NCHR for most of their time, and he recently spoke to us. We believe that archives can inform us equally about the history and about our present, and we're going to do that through 3 words: perspective, memory, and legacy.
Okay, so perspective. Coming into this project, I had a very American view or perspective of both Haiti and Cuba. So everything that I knew was basically from what I learned in history class growing up, and that was a very small amount. So we came into this project, we kind of began learning the context of both countries. So not only what is going on in the present time in Haiti and Cuba, but colonial and post-colonial society. So to start off, we were looking at, in the archive, there's a lot of documents and affidavits of Haitian and Cuban refugees who were detained in Miami. So first between there, we got to see kind of firsthand how they were treated once coming to this country and what they went through. So I think here perspective is very important because beginning, I was able to see the refugee perspective and not just from a policy standpoint what was going on. So a picture that really stood out to me is this one that was taken in the early 90s. This is in front of the White House. And these are all Haitian migrants who have come to this country and are protesting immigration policy that was enacted by President Bush Sr. So to give you a little bit of background, both Haitians and Cubans were fleeing dictatorship regimes in the late 90s. Haitians, here they are arguing that Haitians are locked out because they're Black. So race played a huge role in the differing migrations of the 2 groups, and that also affected policy that was passed. So that policy that they're protesting is a policy that bans pre-asylum screening of Haitian migrants who were interdicted or ships were seized at sea, and mandated immediate detention of them once they arrived to the US. So basically, Haitians were looking to be asylum seekers once they came to the country, which means they were given certain rights once coming. However, with this policy, they're seen as economic refugees, so they're not given the same rights that Cubans were given at the time. So this led them to be detained, and a lot of times they would either be kept there or they would be sent to prisons in states like Louisiana or Texas. So here it's really kind of struck me because here I'm seeing U.S. residents, these Haitians in front of the White House, something I visited personally, and this was going on only 20 or 30 years ago. I had no clue prior to this project, and it really shifted my perspective to understand more so immigration policy and refugees in this country.
Yeah, so memory is how we remember things, but oftentimes our memory can be really spotty and incomplete. And that goes for our private memory, but also this thing that, like, our public memory that we have as a country. And so in the history of the US, we leave out many people's stories, especially people we see as kind of other, and these are minorities, these are the poor, these are the immigrants. And in history classes, what I've learned at least about Haitian history is limited to it being the first slave revolution, but we forget to include our support of Haiti's brutal dictator. We forget to talk about how we occupied Haiti many times. So what does it mean for us to remember Haiti? What does it mean for us to remember its people and organizations like the NCHR that fought for their rights? Why is it important? How can archives help us do this? Through our research in the archive, you can see how organizations like these fought for injustices. We've looked at grant proposals, executive memos, and letters, and pieced together the impact that the NCHR has had on the community. So the NCHR did things from large-scale operations, like sending letters to the president, like affecting policy, but also from small things like its LEAP program, where they helped improve police-Haitian relations in New York, to where they just offered legal help to Haitians. And from this kind of big and small, national, local, we can see how organizations previously fought for people, but also how we can fight for people today. Because when we forget, we fall into kind of the same problems with new nuances. In my blog post that I wrote during this program, I wrote about unaccompanied children that came from Haiti, but were detained in Guantanamo. So right here is a letter that these children sent to President Clinton. And in this letter, they talk about how we're children too. Why don't you care for us? Why do you only let the Cubans in? Why do you let us suffer here? And why do you let us die? And these children, they were detained and they were sent back to Haiti when they had fled their parents being killed. They had fled rape. They had fled political persecution. And the US had just sent them there. And this kind of story has a lot of ties to what's happening at the border right now. And so we can see just how the past is reflecting in us. And by remembering this, even though it's unpleasant, we can recognize that this is not just like an isolated injustice. It's not something that's just because of Trump. It's not just by a party, but that it's rooted in something deeper in our country. Yeah, and so in our time here, we're one of the first to look at this archive. And as archives are important because they are documents from the past, but they have limitations in that they can't have everything. So I want to know what happened to these children after they were sent back to Haiti, or how this organization ended. But yeah, hopefully future researchers will be able to take that. What we've done is try to create something to remember these organizations by.
Finally, this all culminated in us understanding the US's legacy of immigration policy, as well as the legacy of the NCHR, the National Coalition for Haitian Rights. And so a lot of what Asha and Sanha talked about was the detention of immigrants. And that's not really something I could have predicted that we would spend much of our time going into. And that's crazy for me to have that sort of ignorance, especially because we're hearing a lot about the detention of immigrants that are coming to the US today. And so I think all of that kind of process led me to this magazine or newspaper that you see here. We spent a ton of time understanding Haitian and Cuban detention in Guantanamo. Haitians began being detained in Guantanamo in 1991, and Cubans were detained in Guantanamo starting in 1994. Both groups were detained there until 1996, and throughout this period, there's gross injustices enacted on both populations, but there's also an impressively unequal kind of conditions between both groups. Cubans had a ton of advocacy with their population in Miami that was fighting for them, and Haitians did not share that similar support. And because of this, I started looking at Éxodo. It was a magazine produced by Cuban refugees in Guantanamo. It was completely designed by them, all this artwork. Every single copy was handwritten. They're approximately 20 pages long, and they're huge because they were posted in camp centers. And so every week they would come out with a new edition. They had articles. Sometimes they talked about rights, and they helped the refugees understand the Universal Declaration of Rights. But they also had a bunch of cartoons and comics and everything. And that led me to, as you can see here, 2 horoscopes. And through this, I started researching horoscopes because I was like, why would they include horoscopes? It doesn't seem like a very significant thing to include in a newspaper, especially when you're a refugee who's like fighting for your life. But the horoscopes were great. They were an amazing representation of Cuban creativity and ingenuity. They acted as a sort of self-policing system, and they kind of gave other refugees advice and hope, essentially. They would tell them things like, remember to bathe, remember to act respectful. And it was sort of a way that I think the Cuban population was fighting for itself and fighting to be heard and fighting to be understood. And they knew that if they wanted to be respected, they had to maintain a good personality. So our goal throughout all of this was to leave a legacy for the NCHR. And so we did this in 3 distinct ways. Each of us wrote a blog post on a different aspect of the archive, as well as we created a timeline for the NCHR, which outlined its activities. And finally, everything culminated into us creating a Wikipedia page for the NCHR. We did this because no information exists on the NCHR online except from the collection guide that Duke offers. And so we figured a great way to be accessible and to really create the NCHR's mark on the world was through Wikipedia page. And while it's not up yet, it's going through the review process. It will hopefully be up in about 3 weeks. And it was a great way for us to kind of start the research and kind of leave it open for future questions because we didn't have time to answer all the questions that we had. But we hope that this is a great starting point for someone else and really just encourages more populations to understand the NCHR, understand Haitian and Cuban migration, and to continue the conversation about immigration policy in the United States. Thank you. I don't know what else.
Sorry, y'all, but here's the timeline. So it starts in 1950 with the rise of the Duvalier regime, who was the dictator in Haiti at the time. It kind of goes through Castro in Cuba, migration, the radio, which was really popular in Haiti to get out word of what was going on. And yeah, so that's kind of what we did. I think that to end, we would just like to thank everybody who worked on Story Plus, as in Amanda, Christina, Jules, and then also to our grad mentor and professor. My group kind of called me dramatic for this, but I kind of described this project as life-changing in a way because it really shifted how I think of things and how I see the world and kind of also what I might want to do in the future. So I want to say thank you and that it's been a great experience.